Joining us now, former acting ICE director under President Obama, John Sandweg. John, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Let's just start with just your reactions to what you saw over the weekend, Saturday morning in Minneapolis, the tactics used by ICE agents and Border Patrol agents in the moments leading up to and then during that fatal shooting.
Yeah, hard to watch and unfortunately probably not terribly surprising given everything that's been leading up to this. Listen, myself and tons of other people with experience at ICE or DHS have recognized that when you have this mass deployment of these Border Patrol agents, you've created a very high risk situation because the Border Patrol agents are trained to operate in a completely different environment. As we also know, these protesters are exercising their First Amendment rights. These are just not situations you encounter when you are operating at the border. We've seen these incredibly aggressive approaches that they've had to these protesters, throughout this surge of forces into Minneapolis. Federal courts have expressed concerns with it. And I guess it just, again, talking to former agents who had told me, in their minds, it was just a question of when this was going to happen, not if this was going to happen. So I agree with, one thing I wanted to say quickly as well. For an investigation, I agree with what you just said, though. It's all the events leading up to it as well that are critical for this analysis.
Yeah, John, I want to ask you, you look at these images, not only of this tragedy, but others, and you see 4, 5, 6 officers struggling and escalating the situation and not taking the person down. We've commented before, you have 2 NYPD cops who are trained.
Or Minneapolis cops.
As they are Minneapolis cops or LAPD cops. Who, 2 could go in, take somebody down and restrain them and safely cuff them and get them to custody without anybody getting hurt. Talk about what you see in these videos, not just the execution type shooting that many people say looked like it was execution style, but also leading up to it, the apparent incompetence and bumbling by a group of people that have absolutely no interest in de-escalating the situation.
And I think you nailed it right there. And
also may be scared.
Yeah, Joe, look, I think you nailed it right there, which is the de-escalation part of this. DHS use of force policies call for de-escalation in these situations. And I'm going to refrain judgment, unlike the Secretary and the Border Patrol Chief Bovino, in terms of saying who is right or wrong. There has to be an investigation, and obviously we could talk about whether there can be credibility in any investigation given the rush to judgment we've already seen. But when you watch the video, it does raise certain questions, which is, okay, what was the basis for the arrest in the first place? It does appear, what steps were taken to de-escalate the situation? What was the basis for the use of pepper spray? But what crime was committed as well? We talk a lot, there's this, part of the problem here, Joe, is that there's a thin line between what constitutes impeding a federal officer and doing his job and what is protected First Amendment activity. And again, I've said this again and again, I feel like I hate saying it, sound like a broken record, but we're using Border Patrol agents who just never have to encounter that. And these agents were trained, I think we've heard, they're relatively seasoned, but it is just so far outside of their normal experiences in that high-risk environment they work at down in the middle of the Arizona desert in the middle of the night. It is hard to decide where that line is. They typically are not as quick to de-escalate because of the environment in which they operate. You put those agents en masse in a city like Minneapolis, you encourage them, you talk about absolute immunity, you talk about how these are domestic terrorists they are confronting, how everything that impedes them is a crime. And I hate to say it, this is the natural, this is what you need to expect to happen. And I look, at the end of the day, the leadership at DHS knows this. They continued this deployment anyway. We need to investigate exactly what those officers were thinking. Anytime you're arresting someone with a gun, the tensions are high. But I think the bigger question is, what were we doing here in the first place, and why did we deploy all of these Border Patrol agents in Minneapolis to begin with?
Yeah, and Mika, it brings up a great point that, again, hearing from Kristi Noem and others that they have this immunity. Yesterday, you had that guy in the funny jacket go on the Sunday shows, literally saying that we the federal government can take away somebody's Second Amendment rights if they delay enforcement, or if they impede enforcement, or if they obstruct enforcement. In this case, you had a Good Samaritan active, a man trying to pick up a woman who had been brutally pushed down on the pavement. And for that, he got pepper sprayed, tackled, and then shot
Killed.
6, 7, 8, 9, possibly 10 times. No, you can't take away people's Second Amendment rights. And they're trying to create an absolute immunity that does not exist. And for any ICE officers watching right now, liability will go beyond this administration.
Yeah.
So just
Yeah.
watch. Be careful.
To
be
that
careful.
point, John, I just want to talk to you and ask you about the importance of the public trust in a democracy. Following procedure, due process, judicial warrants being honored. We're seeing that all be broken in case after case after case after case after case around the country. Videos and cases happening every day. What is the impact of all of that? Plus, in this case, a flashpoint, along with the killing of Renee Good, of the rushing to judgment, rushing to say he was brandishing a gun, rushing to tell the public something that does not appear to be true.
Yeah, I mean, look, in the short term, it just as it relates to this investigation, now you've seen the narrative shift where administration officials are saying there needs to be an investigation. First of all, an investigation, anytime there's a shooting, fatal or otherwise, is standard protocol. It is a requirement at DHS. But two is when you rush to this judgment and then you're quickly undercut by the videos, it becomes incredibly hard to then say, well, we DHS, and look, DHS has the professional capacity to do an investigation. There's an Office of Professional Responsibility at ICE that's criminal investigators. The Office of Inspector General of DHS has criminal investigators who would traditionally conduct these investigations. The problem is, do we trust the leadership now to accurately or professionally handle the conclusions of the investigators? And when you come out here and you say this narrative, this was an assault and he was going up to kill agents, and when we see these videos that clearly undercut that narrative so quickly, it destroys the public's trust in that. But Mika, if I may, just very quickly, the bigger issue is it destroying the public's trust in ICE as a law enforcement agency, and what damage is that doing to the ability of ICE to promote public safety? All good. Anyone who has law enforcement experience will tell you that the law enforcement agency is only as good as that trust that the public has in it and its ability to work cooperatively with state and locals, but also the communities it's seeking to protect. Unfortunately, we are rapidly destroying that trust and credibility that's going to take ICE a long time to recover from.
Yeah, we're seeing public poll after public poll suggests that Americans indeed have soured on what ICE is doing. Former acting ICE director under President Obama, John Sandweg. John, thank you so much for joining us this morning.